Welcome, comadres and friends. I'm Dr. Nora de Hoyos Comstock, national and international founder of Las Comadres para las Americas. The leadership team and I are pleased to have you join us for tonight's teleconference as we begin our 17th year. It has been truly our privilege to support Latino authors throughout these 17 years, and we look forward to many more years. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our live Twitter chat at Read Latino Lit. Also tonight, please help us welcome Diana Silva and Karla Tatiana Vasquez. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. And before I say anything else, I'd really like to welcome our comadre, Nidia Marsala, to the Las Comadres book club team. We're so excited that you're joining us. She's been a comadre for, wow, nearly, I guess at least 20 years, comadre.
I think so, yeah.
At least 20 years. So we are thrilled to have you joining us, and bienvenida.
My privilege.
So comadres, keep yourselves on mute because we are taping. You can keep your videos on if you want, but remember not to move around a lot because we can see you and it becomes a little bit distracting. So if you're going to leave your video on, don't move a whole lot. And we suggest you put yourself on speaker mode, but if you want gallery, that works as well. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get them. We'll try to get to them. So now let's start with our book club's history. Comadre Nidia.
Sure. Okay, so our first book gathering was in July 2004 here in New York City. After a quick pause, Nora re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover and to bring our community to bookstores and to support our writers. We started these conferences in October of 2006. We are in our 16th year of sharing work by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots, and the different perspective on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just to Latino. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writing's mind and soul, and as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or time zone. We have 12 different cities, clubs in 12 different cities. There is sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not? Maybe you can help us starting one. For more information about our book club, visit our website, latinolit.com, latinolit.com. So please invite others to join us. And now, Comadre Karen, take it away.
Welcome, comadres and friends, to our November 2024 Zoom teleconference. I'm Karen Gonzalez, Assistant Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, Denver Comadres Book Club Facilitator, and co-founder of the Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our first interview is with Diana Silva, writing as Mole Mama, from her humble diary farm childhood to author, Silicon Valley tech executive, blogger, podcaster, and Food Network's Guys Grocery Games competitor. Diana's guilty of using delicious home-cooked food to connect with friends, family, employees, and strangers. Cooking for others is her love language, and if you've been in her inner circle or worked with her, you've most likely tasted her luscious dishes. She believes home-cooked food can break down cultural and generational barriers, create a sense of belonging amongst coworkers, friends, and family, and create real meaningful connections and magic. Interviewing Mole Mama is Tess Tobin, project manager for Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. Tess is the former president of Reforma, and has been a proud member of the book club since 2007, and she enjoys promoting the work of Latino authors. Take it away, Comadres.
Thank you, Karen. Hello, Diana, how are you? It's nice to have you with us.
Hello, it's so great to be here, Tess. Thank you so much for including me tonight. I'm thrilled to be here.
Very good. Okay, many of us have read the book, but there are a few who will. So can you just start with a brief summary of Abuelita's magical Molcajete?
So Abuelita's magical Molcajete is about cooking ghosts. Specifically, our heroine, Maria, is visited by her Abuelita and 8 of her tias, and they teach her how to cook at night. They come once a month for 11 months, and she is grieving the death of her twin sister, so her life is kind of spiraling in a mess. And because of the tias and the Abuelita's meddling ways, at the end of our story, she is blossoming and completely different, and it's just a fun, I think, story. It's also about grief, though. Forgiveness and hope is what I keep hearing from readers, is really where they're connecting, is around this idea of just hopefulness. And some of my readers have said they feel like they've gotten a giant hug. That's how, when they finish reading the story.
That's lovely. What was your inspiration behind writing this book?
So at the end of 2020, I was in the hospital and quite sick, and I was in the middle of COVID. I didn't have COVID, but I asked a question. It was like, Diana, if you had 1 year left to live, what would you be doing with your life? And I heard very strongly that you'd be writing every day. I'd written a book before this one. And so the next day when I was home from the hospital, I sat down and I started writing. And I have a writing space in my house and with my Abuelita Santitos, so with her saints around me. And I just said, I'm here to write. So show me, guide me. And this story literally just flowed into me. I never had an outline. I did not have a plan that I was writing a magical realism novel. And it just flowed. And the very first thing that I heard when I started writing was the pounding of a molcajete. And so I was like, wow, my Abuelita, she immigrated to the United States from Mexico through the state of California in the early 20s, came in illegally with a coyote. And in her suitcase, she had her molcajete. And I have it. I have her molcajete. My mother used it. I used it. So for it to be the mechanism in my story where the ghosts actually travel from this world to the other side, it just rolled in, was just a magical thing. And all of the women in the story were my tias or my primas. Tia Rosa was my mother. So I was able to reconnect with these women. I grew up on a dairy farm, and so I cooked a lot with them. So to reconnect with them at this stage in my life, when I was a little girl, they wouldn't talk to me about a lot of the conversations they had with Maria. So it was just a fun thing to do. And honestly, some of their mannerisms are true. Like my tia Amelia really did smoke cigars. So to everybody, nobody was happy about that, but she really did. So
Right. Oh, that's great. So did they bring you within to teach you how to cook at that age, or you just observing? How did that go?
I had hands-on training. So I remember the very first time my mother asked me to help her make the flour tortillas. She'd make tortillas de harina every single night. We had a large, huge family. We always had people in family visiting. And she let me put my hands in the masa and mix it up. And as soon as I did that, I was like, oh, I love this. And I just always helped her. And we butchered all of our animals. I mean, I grew up, we raised pigs and sheep, and we had, a huge garden. And I would help. My mother's grandfather had been a butcher, so she knew how to carve up a whole side of beef or anything. So I would help her. So I have rad knife skills because my mom taught me. I've not, had professional chef training, but it was hands-on. And when we would make tamales, pozole, whatever it was, I've always loved to eat. And so I'm happy to help cook so that I can eat later. So all of my training was really hands-on.
Yeah, that's the best way, I think, and to have it within the family. And that's like my next question. You've been quoted as saying, for many home chefs, cooking is their preferred love language, and that's why we cherish their recipes. Their love has the power to transcend an ordinary recipe into magic. Can you elaborate on that? Is that really what's the big part of this book?
Absolutely. I think that when we're cooking, our energy, it might sound a little woo-woo, gets just, it goes into our food. So sometimes, like for me, even though I know how to make my mother's Spanish rice, one of my favorite recipes that she used to make, it smells like hers, it tastes like hers, but it's not hers because her essence, her love isn't in that recipe. So that's what I mean by that, is that I believe that a little piece of us gets put into those recipes when we make them ourselves.
Right. Very good. There's many mouth-watering recipes in this book. I love the way you've organized the chapters where you have the Abuelita and las tias come and do the cooking lessons, and it's within the story of Maria and her family. How did you choose the recipes to put in this book? There's so many. How did you choose the ones that you highlighted with the abuela? Was it
I
hard?
Yeah, it was really hard to choose which ones, but I chose my favorites. And I also thought about if I was going to help somebody who did not know how to cook any recipes at all, any Mexican food, this was kind of the order that I would teach them. And foundationally, I started with flour tortillas because I think the tortilla is the glue. It's going to hold everything together. And so, I just kept going from there. And the next most important thing in my mind was rice and beans, like after the tortillas. And so it kept getting more and more complex. With at the end, we're doing a tamaladera. So we're learning tamales at the very, very end. Pozole is also towards the end. So I think what I wanted our readers to understand is that she's learning, she's getting better. And as she's getting better, she can try more complex recipes.
Oh,
But they're my favorites. They're things that I love to eat. And even pink conchas are a big part of this book. And I almost feel like they're a character in my book because they're all
right,
over
right,
the place.
right. Yes. Everybody enjoys them.
They're so good. How could you not? Yeah, love a pink concha.
Right, right. I found the story to be very heartwarming. I wanted to know what was going to happen next, and it really drew me in. And like you said in your summary, there's a lot of themes. There's love, loss, grief, family, romance, ghosts, magic, and there is forgiveness. How did you go about div- in, including all these themes? I mean, like you said, it just seemed to flow. But was there something else that you wanted to tell your readers?
So as I mentioned earlier, Tess, it just flowed in. And by the time I had 40,000 words, I reached out to my writing coach and I think I have a novel. And I would sit down and just things would come up. And I had lost a sister a few years ago. And I think there was a lot of that comes through was with Maria and the grief that she has around losing a sister. Um, I've had, so many relatives who, I don't want to do spoilers, but there's a lot of forgiveness. There's a lot of mistakes that all of us make. And my mom was a huge believer in letting things go and forgiving people. And so I think it just came through because of the lessons that my family taught me. And so, um, but so much of this was not me. It just flowed through me. And sometimes my husband would come downstairs because I have a writing space, and as I mentioned, and I would always write at 5:45 in the morning. I would write for an hour every day. That's what I did. That's how I did it. I had an appointment, and there I'd go. And sometimes my husband would come downstairs, and I'd be laughing. And he's like, What's going on?" I go, "You're not going to believe what they did today. You're just not going to believe it." And he's like, so it was just flowing through me. I had, definitely through the editing, we changed some things, but it really flowed. The primary, I would say, just arcs, and they just came through. The Tias and
Right, right.
Abuelita.
That's great. I mean, that's wonderful. Like I said, I've loved all the characters, and there's a lot of female strong, and there's a word in many reviews that call your characters sassy, which I kind of like. The women, they're going to tell you what they think. Was there any character in particular that you enjoyed writing about, or did they all sort of, you felt the same about all of them?
So the Tia Rosa is my mom. So of course that was really fun to write about her. And Tia Hoovy. So Tia Hoovy is super spicy, and her and my mom were the ones that really were my primary master chefs, and I did a lot of cooking with Tia Hoovy. And it was just fun. There's a part in the book, this is a spoiler, where she throws some cake. And my Tia Hoovy never did this, but she was so sassy, I could imagine her doing it. And there were a couple of times when I was like, she's going to throw food at that person. So that's what it came through. And, she was super stylish, and she loved red. And so it was just so much fun to, like I said, spend time with her. And she loved her little shot of Presidente, alcohol. So,
Yeah, they like
and these were women that immigrated from Mexico. They were strong, they were resilient, they were powerful, they held their families together. So I was just so thrilled to give them the opportunity to have a voice. And I think so many of us have these women in our lineage that supported us and helped us become who we are.
Right, right. I know they were very good. Now I see, you have a YouTube channel. Which came first, your writing or the channel, or the YouTube channel, your cooking channel, right?
My cooking channel came first. I had worked in Silicon Valley for many years, and I had talked to some really big Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that I work for, going, we need a blog, we need a YouTube channel that celebrates family recipes. And this is a long time ago. This is like 15, 20 years ago. And I'd always get, like, yeah, no, that'll never work. So when my mother died, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. So that's what really was the motivator. And the reason why everything is called Mole Mama is that when I've met other Latinos and their families make mole, they always tell you, oh, my family's is the best, my tias or my abuelas. And so to me, mole is something that represents the best in our heritage. And so I wanted to be a reminder that there's the best in all of us. So that's why I chose that name.
Oh, okay. And are you still working on, are you adding to it your recipes
I
on
have
the
been
YouTube channel?
very slowly because of the book and because of the blog. And I was on the Food Network last year, so that was kind of I was on a lot of shows, so that was a lot going on there. But yes, and I was actually experimenting all weekend long making blue masa tamales. So yeah, there's a lot more coming soon.
Oh, good. Yeah, and I also saw on Instagram you have a series on, how to preserve your molcajete and all these things. So is that another area you're just trying to share with people?
Absolutely. I'm obsessed with molcajetes. I think I own 3 of them. So, and I think they're just a treasure. I know mine is a treasure for my family. And there's other people that I've talked to that are like, yeah, we need our children to continue this legacy. And they are so much fun to work, to cook with. And several years ago, my tia Hoovy, we were in Mexico together, and she took me to a little restaurant outside of Chapala, which is in Jalisco. And they were making, the whole restaurant was just hot dishes with a molcajete. And I was obsessed. So that's why I've created a queso fundido molcajete. So it's like a melted cheese with rajas, which is, poblano peppers that are roasted, and it's chorizo. It's so yummy. And then I've also done a tequila prawns molcajete. So that's definitely one of my passions, is cooking with molcajetes. And so there's more development going. And when I was on the Food Network, they actually ordered molcajetes for me, and they'd never been used before on Guy's Go Through Game show. And I was able to cook with them twice, which was super cool to be able to do that and just talk about the molcajete and what an important part of it, our lineage it is in our cooking.
Yeah, It's nice to pass that down, that's the nice thing. And it'd be nice, with intergenerational, if you could get the younger generation to get involved, because, these recipes may disappear if you don't, pass them on. So I'm so glad you have that exposure and everything. I know we're here to talk about this book, but I saw that your previous book is also Mole Mama, a memoir of love, cooking, and loss. Can you tell us a little bit about that book? I think it's very important too with all your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. So my first book is a memoir about my mom and I. And as I mentioned earlier, I grew up cooking with her, and I had never perfected her recipes. She never had written anything down. None of my abuela's recipes were written down. And at the end of her life, she was given 3 days to live. We put her into hospice, and she ended up living for 13 months. So during those 13 months, I made 40 visits to her. It was like 4 hours away from where I was living. I'd spend the weekend with her, and I'd cook all of her recipes. And during that time, that's when I perfected her recipes. So I was making everything. She was taste testing from her hospital bed, and I was writing everything down. I had no idea, Tess, that someday it would be a book, but it was how we said goodbye. And I'm just so honored that I was able to capture those recipes and have them. And it was over 100 actually that I was able to capture during that time. And that's how we said goodbye. And so that's what that first book is about.
Yeah, very inspirational and beautiful. So, anything you want to tell any aspiring writers coming up about your writing style, or how you seem to be disciplined by writing every morning? Is that something that you been doing for a while?
It is. And I have to say is, if you feel like you're a writer, even though you've never written, the number one thing is give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to write and explore. I think for me, I'd always wanted to be a writer. I've been writing stories since I was a little girl. I loved to read. That was my escape. I loved going to the library. We couldn't afford to buy books, so going to the library and checking them out, oh my gosh, that was just my escape. And so give yourself permission first and foremost, and then make sure, for me, I hate to be late to meetings. I hate to skip meetings. Like, that's not my thing. So I put a meeting on my phone, my writing space. And then when the alarm goes off and it's super early and dark in the morning in the winter and I don't want to get up, I have a little sticky next to my bed that says, how bad do you want this? So that's really motivating for me. And then I find that when I write, I'm joyful. Like, it brings joy to my heart. Like, it doesn't really matter if things turn into books or blog posts, but I've finally accepted that I'm a storyteller. That's who I am. That's just who I am. And giving myself permission to do that. And I am working on the sequel to Abuelita's Magical Molcajete. And the next story is all about Tia Hoovy. So she gets into a lot of trouble.
Good. That was going to be my next question. What are you working on now? How far along are you? Are just in the putting it all together stage?
I'm about a third of the way done. Yeah, and she's, boy, she is in a lot of trouble. That's all I want to say. She's in so much trouble. And I go into more detail. I think my readers have also said that they would love to know more about the character's backstory. And how did they get over to the other side? What was their life, their life a little bit more. So there's a lot more of that in this story too.
Right. Well, we're so happy you joined us this evening, Diana. I know I enjoyed the book, and I'm sure our readers have too. I wish you well on your next project, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Karen?
Gracias, comadres. Our second interview is with Karla Tatiana Vasquez, a food writer, recipe developer, and food stylist based in Los Angeles. Her writing has been published by the Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and Teen Vogue, among others. Her recipe development work can be seen in Food and Wine, Serious Eats, BuzzFeed Tasty, and Taste Made. She is also a food justice advocate and an active member in her community to increase healthy food accessibility in low-income communities, previously working with Hunger Action Los Angeles and Los Angeles Food Policy Council. She founded Salvisoul to preserve her family's recipes, and since then it's expanded to focus on cultural memory and intergenerational healing for the Salvadoran diaspora. Interviewing Karla is Comadre Cindy Landez, a civil engineer with 30+ years of experience. She is currently a project manager in utility coordination at KCI Technologies. Cindy is currently a facilitator for Las Comadres San Antonio section. In the past few months, she has worked on Las Comadres Cookbook due to come out before the end of the year. In addition to Las Comadres, Cindy is the president-elect for American Society of Civil Engineering Board, ASCE, San Antonio chapter, and an active member of Women in Transportation, San Antonio region. In addition, Cindy has been serving as a court-appointed special advocate, CASA, C-A-S-A, for local foster children in the past 3 years. For this work, she was acknowledged by her company and nationwide as 2024 Volunteer of the Year. Take it away, Comadre Cindy.
Thank you. Karla, good evening. Thank you. It's so nice to meet you. And I'd like to start off by saying I really enjoyed reading your cookbook. I love it more. I love it that it was more than just recipes, but also a love story because I could feel your passion, your enthusiasm, and intense emotions in each of the stories. I have to admit, I haven't tried any of the recipes, but the book had me so immersed just because of the stories and the details in each of the journeys. I liked that I read the obstacles and the challenges that they encountered and how it helped shape my perspective of the cookbook. So I'd like to start by asking you a little bit about yourself before we get into the book. Did you study at a culinary school? If so, which one, when, and what is your specialty?
Thank you, Cindy, so much. I appreciate those comments, and no worries. It took me 9 years to gather these recipes and stories. So I tell folks, like, we eat with our eyes, including books, and it's like, pace yourself. But yes, I did attend culinary school. I was at the time several years ago, working at a farmer's market. I was managing a farmer's market, and the farmers needed to have some sort of like samples to show people how to use the ingredients. And so as the manager, I was ready to do what I could to bring people in. So I started doing cooking classes. And as I did them using the ingredients at the market, people would say, "Oh, thank you, chef." And I'd say, "No, I'm not a chef. And, I'm ready to come next week to learn something new." And which kind of made me panic. And so I found a program that I could do while I was working as a farmer's market manager. And this was a 6-month program here in Culver City in California. And I got to do that. And there's a huge light bulb moment that I experienced when I was going through this program, and I write about it in the book. And it was a real huge, a big part of the impetus for this project. We were doing a class on eggs. As you know, you can do so many things with eggs. You can use it in, all kinds of baked goods. You can make omelets, you can make sauces, mayonnaise, all these things. And so someone in the class asked our instructor, why is it that we say words like omelet and sauté? These are French words, and she herself was Middle Eastern, and the instructor was Korean, and here I am from El Salvador. It's like, how do we all know what this is? For many of us, we don't even have to say it's an egg pancake. You can imagine your favorite omelet in your mind already because it's so ubiquitous, right? And that's when the instructor says, I'm not sure, but it must be. She kind of has this like snaps her fingers and says, it must be because the French were the first to document the process. And that was a huge moment for me because at the time I had been lamenting that my recipes that I grew up with in my home were not accessible. They were not part of the main pop culture conversation. And it seemed like what she was saying was so simple, like, oh, I just have to document it. That's it. And I have a degree in journalism. I'm in culinary school now. Maybe I should start documenting these foodways. And there's big reasons why there hasn't been a book on Salvadoran food. The Salvisoul Cookbook is the first Salvadoran cookbook to be published by a Big Five publisher in the history of the US. So there's big reasons, but one felt like, okay, we can document a recipe for sure. So that's what started that journey. And as far as specialty, it's definitely very much Salvadoran focused. I'm really obsessed with learning more about this very small country. Often when you are in culinary spaces, if you're from a country that's large and well known for its food, like France or Italy, there's often this perception that those are the only real things that can offer something to world cuisine. But I felt that it was an unfair way to kind of categorize the cuisine of countries that are smaller, that have had a lot of a history with poverty, right? I felt like there's reasons for that. Historically, we know what Central American's history is, and that all impacts food. So that's kind of how I came into it.
That's awesome. So you touched on something I was going to ask you. I know that you researched this project since 2014. And I was going to ask, did you study journalism or creative writing during this time to create a strong foundation for the book? But obviously you had a journalism background. Can you speak to that? How it helped you? Because the stories are really, really awesome. I really enjoyed them. Ask my husband, I wouldn't put the book down every night.
Oh, wow. I love that. Yes, I think the journalism is very much my attempt to kind of I'll say this. If I chose journalism, it's because I was really trying to harness the skills that I saw my family so elegantly access every day. You know, I think that every immigrant has an odyssey to tell. And the stories that I read in school were often from people who were from places like Europe. You know, we'd learn all these things. And I always felt like I'd go to the library and I'm such a library kid. Before I'm from El Salvador, before I'm a woman, I'm a library kid. I love my library card and I would go to the library, go to the encyclopedia, go grab the books that had the E and then grab the books that had the S. And I would look for El Salvador in the E and it always said go to S. So then I knew it. I had the S book and I'd go El Salvador and then it would say go to Latin America. So then I'd go back, get the L, and then finally I would look at what it said there. And it was just a sentence that I would find about El Salvador in this huge encyclopedia. And it would just say, El Salvador is one of the smallest countries in Latin America. And that was it. If there was more, it was probably about the Civil War. And I thought, surely there must be more because when I'm at home, there's these brilliant stories I hear about the place. The storytelling of my mom, of my grandmother, my dad. I felt like I could hear the score of this film I was watching. The cinematography was beautiful. Everything was set up in a way where they created worlds, and I just got to enjoy them as I would sit down. And so the the exchange of culture and the storytelling that was part of the meal. To be honest, we passed around the tortillas and the frijoles, and you got a side of story with every meal. And I think I became addicted to that. And I thought, well, how could I make a living off of this? And journalism seemed to be the way where I could still access stories from people and get into the granular, you know. I think that all of us have epic moments in our life. And I think what's powerful about these stories, and honestly, what almost stopped me from writing the book was feeling, how can I tell a story about somebody's life when their life is this enormous tale? And I found a lot of power in being able to share just a vignette, just a moment. Maybe these are literal, the 30 seconds in your life, but I'm, you know, stretching it out so we could really examine what happened in those 30 seconds. But how you lived your life in those 30 seconds can tell us a lot about who you are, how you walk this earth. And so that is what became really appealing to me and what I learned through a lot of my journalism training.
That's great. So one more question about your story or your background before I ask questions about the book. I love how the book feels like you're sitting across the table talking to me, and I'm not reading. I feel I can hear your voice. How did that style come about? Like, was it just, tell me how you wrote that book to where I felt like you were sitting talking to me at the table.
Wow. You know, I think it's a lot of things. I started this book with my grandmother. She was the one who, I didn't have a name, I didn't really have a concept, but I knew what happened when we were together. And sometimes she would eat something and it would just be like a jack in the box, like a memory would spring up. And you could see it in her mind, in her face, like she was so hungry to follow that memory so that she could remember details and you know, share them with me. And so I think that for me, having had those experiences with my grandmother, and every time I would interview the women, there was an ease that I felt as a writer. Sometimes I don't experience because I'm so busy thinking about the reader. Writing in some ways can be very challenging because we're thinking about somebody else. We're not thinking about what we need to put on paper. We're thinking about impressing an editor, New York Times bestseller list. Like there's pressures when you're trying to put something on a page. And I really tried to strip those kind of expectations from myself and just think about that moment. What are the necessary details that this person needs to know about this story that has a great ending, you know? And that was kind of the guiding star, the guiding principle. You know, my grandmother never made it past second grade, but she was a phenomenal storyteller and she never once had writer's block. And that's because she was so enamored with the story. She could have cared less what you thought about it, or she wasn't trying to impress anybody. She was just trying to, hey, I think that this is a great story and you should know it. And so that I think has been one of the more liberating experiences of this part of the process. And so I'm glad that it feels that way because I wanted it to feel like you are in, you know, the homes of so many of the women I got to meet for this project.
I know you just mentioned your grandma, Mama Lucy,
Yeah.
and her story was sad, but I could feel the love for her, and I can understand why she was your first interview. But I have to ask, what was your favorite meal that she made you as a child?
Oh man, honestly, she had so many bangers, as they say. Um, I want to say that the way that my Mama Lucy, um, I think a lot of her recipes I can still cook, right? Because we've been able to save and preserve that sazon, right? The thing that I still long for and I miss so much that I can't recreate is when you walked into the kitchen and you saw her and all of her cooking projects. She would have like meat hanging from the ceiling with where she had installed the hook. She was making her own jerky. And it was just a certain like, Mama Lucy, ¿qué está haciendo? What are you doing? And at the same time, she had her hands in some cheese and whey that she was making because she's like, I didn't want the milk to go bad. I thought I'd make some fresh cheese. Oh, okay, great. Like she just had all these little things that those are the things I can't recreate. And I think that those are the things that I long for, and they taught me so much about my own womanhood, my own sense of self, and how I can nourish myself. And so, yeah, I think witnessing her is what I miss most.
Mm, that's very strong emotion for me. So I miss my grandma, so I understand that.
Yes.
You had 33 stories in the book, 2 from your grandmothers, 1 from your mom, 3 tias, and 6 from friends, but you had 10 from from online. And I want to ask you, on those online, how many submittals did you choose? I mean, did you receive? And you chose the 10, but how many did you receive?
A lot. I knew that I had, when I started the project, I knew that I wouldn't be able to capture the scope of Salvadoran food from just my family, because when they left El Salvador, they were in their 20s. Like, it's crazy to assume that a 20-something-year-old will know all the different foods of all the holidays. And so when I did a call out, I got emails and DMs on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter from people in Abu Dhabi, in Paris, in Minnesota, in Georgia, everywhere here in this country, and anywhere that the diaspora traveled to be honest with you. And at that point, I realized I really have bitten off more than I could chew here. Like I am really making this up as I go, and now I need to figure this out. And so what I decided was honest to this journey was I needed to have access to the women, and we needed to cook together. So it felt that anyone who I couldn't drive to, I would just say, like, I don't know when this book is going to happen. And it took 9 years. And some of the women I met in 2016. So this took a while. Like, I'm going to need to have access to you. And so there were a lot of people who eventually said, you know what, good luck. I don't think I'm the right person for this. And I really can't remember the number of women. Sometimes it wasn't even the women who, it was their children, adult children, who nominated their moms and saying, hey, you need to include my mom because she has the best recipe for salvi enchiladas, and oh my gosh, you need to do this. And so it was a mix of it. And of course, after the pandemic and during the pandemic, that kind of created a little bit of a decision-making funnel, because there were so many people who were so interested in doing this, but due to the stress of it all, and like, we're just doing our best with the whole pandemic. I can't add, another thing. It just became, the people who stuck with me are the people who eventually we were able to continue working together. And I'm so grateful for it, because they all said yes to me when I really just had an idea, a curiosity, but nothing compared to what the book eventually became.
That's awesome. So before you started the call for recipes, did you have like a predetermined list of recipes you knew you wanted and then just fluctuated as you went along? Or how were you surprised at what came out of it all?
Oh yes, I mean, I knew there were some, like, I knew this would be the first Salvadoran cookbook, so there was a few recipes I felt we have to have this. Like, we are making a proper introduction, El Salvador and the US, here's the cuisine. And so it felt like we need to have XYZ included. Because I had gotten so many no's and I had gotten so much pushback from people in the food world, in the cookbook world, agents saying things like, where in Mexico is El Salvador? People saying like El Salvador is the same thing as every other Latin American country. I had another Latino who said to me, Karla, you're wasting your time because Americanos only want to know about Mexican, Peruvian, maybe the Caribbean. So find something else to do. And so there was this creeping fear, and I like to say this thing out loud because I think when we say the things that bully us inside, we have more freedom, right? I was really afraid that I was going to run out of food or run out of things to write about because there were all these voices that told me you're going to run out of things to write about. But I had the strength of my grandmother. I had witnessed them, and they just loved Salvi food. The way they cooked was just like, oh, isn't this so good, Carla? And I'd be like, yes. And I felt like I need to, my confidence, and if I have any authority, it's been given to me by Salvadoran abuelitas, not an institution that validated my work, but abuelitas who said, yes, mommy, you know what you're doing. And so I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what other recipes needed to be in this book until I started interviewing the women. I kept saying, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep doing this. So when I did this call out and I would tell the women, I'm going to come over for an interview. At the end of the interview, I would say, like, what would you like to contribute to this book? And some of them would say, well, I want to make the famous panes con pollo because my recipe is the best one. And that was a whole nother touchy kind of thing because it's like, how do you make everybody happy? And so I would just say, you know what? I already have someone for that. Is there something else? And then they would kind of say, oh, well, now I don't know if I want to do this because this is the recipe like that I know and love. And one of them, eventually I said to her, like, well, just tell me another thing that your family really enjoys. And then she said, gallo en chicha. I thought, gallo en chicha? I have never heard of, what is gallo en chicha? She's like, oh, well, it's something that we eat for the holidays in my canton. And, a lot of Salvadorans will eat pupusas or panes con pollo or tamales, but we don't eat that. We eat gallo en chicha. And I said, well, how about contributing that recipe? And she says, oh no, Carla, this is like farmer's food. This is not a chef kind of thing that needs to be in a book. And instead of fighting her on it, I asked, well, tell me what you think is farmer's food, like just explain what this is. And she goes on to explain a recipe that takes 5 days, has 25 ingredients, and just, yeah, I'm completely stunned. Like, this is exciting. Like, this is an amazing thing. And I think a lot of that, like, it goes to show that not only am I who's trying to champion a book, not only am I hearing these narratives and these myths about my cooking and where I come from, but also other women, other people are hearing what we have isn't, great. And, here in this country, we love talking about restaurants and how they're very farm to table, but farm to table could not, like, that is Salvadoran cuisine. That is the essence of how we cook. And so you start to see how so much of the legacies of colonialism, imperialism, racism do end up on the table as well, and we consume it. And if we are not vigilant, then what we know is real and true and beautiful starts to be casted with a veneer that's, oh, it's not beautiful. right? And so that was a there were a lot of lessons for me in that moment. And, now it's in the book. And it's just incredible to me that that was something that she talked about it in a way that was, menospreciando, belittling, that huge contribution. But now it's in the book.
Awesome. So did you cook these recipes, each one, and did you get somebody else to test them also?
Yes. So definitely I had, because of the pandemic, I was meeting up with all of the women to cook these recipes. And that was kind of an interesting experience too, because so many of the women, when they cook a recipe, they're cooking it as if it's like a holiday. So like one of the recipes is it's like a picnic sandwich, for a picnic, for a day out, an excursion, you want to bring food. And she said to me, Karla, you're gonna come over, but we're gonna be here a while. And I thought, it's just sandwiches. Like, it's not like I couldn't, the math wasn't mathing, right? I didn't understand what she meant. And then finally I realized that with those sandwiches, her son alone ate 4 and then took another 2. And she's like, these things are just you eat them so quickly. And so big batches were a big thing. And yeah, there were a lot of trial and error, calling the women and saying, it's looking this way. Is that how it's supposed to look? Or, yeah, I had lots of phone calls with some of the women, taking photos, doing voice notes, doing and using as much of technology as possible to help me. And I thought that was also a really beautiful thing, because I think for a lot of us who have family that are not near us, it's kind of a rite of passage to kind of have like the phone here while you're mixing. It's like, oh, it's bubbling up. Is that right? And I think that's a really, I think that's the stuff of life, as they say, like I'm trying to give you all of the visual cues I'm seeing so you can tell me, give me an affirmative. And yeah, I got to do that many, many, many times.
I love that. So I know that you're promoting this book in the United States, but are you promoting it in El Salvador? And are you doing it in Spanish also, a Spanish version?
I would love to do a Spanish version, because there have been a few bookstores and people in El Salvador who have contacted me and said, hey, how can we get the book here? Um, and those are questions I think my publisher, they haven't given me a straight answer. I'll be very honest. And I've said, hey, when is it getting translated? I think a lot of that is a sales question. How well is the book selling? That there's promise that it will be worth the investment. Because that's been the conversation with this book for as long as I can remember. And we have been able to to prove them wrong, which it was never about proving people wrong, because I think that can't be the focus. The focus is always celebrating and insisting that what we have is beautiful. And just today I got to announce that we made it on the NPR uh, books books list of best books of 2024. And there were a few cookbooks on that list, and yeah, it's never been about proving people, but it sure is nice when you can say, told you so.
I'd like to thank you for your time. I have like 30 more questions, but I'm out of time. So I appreciate it. And if I could just sit and talk to you, I probably would, because I really loved this book, and I have tagged it, and I know everybody else is going to enjoy it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, goodness. 2 excellent interviews, and y'all made me hungry. And something that You know, it's family is equal food and equals love. And the stories that you all wrote about your family, about these, the love shows through. These are epic stories when we share so much and we're witnessing other lives in shared experiences. Thank you very, very much for doing that. I am not a cook, but I do love to eat. So I will share in that way. So we really do want to thank our authors and their publishers. And it's Cuevas, LLC, and also 10 Speed Press for their generous donation of books to our early registrants. And thank you to our fabulous interviewers, Comadre Testove and Cindy Landres. We also want to thank our audience for taking the time to join us tonight, and to those that submitted questions. And we'd like to thank all of our volunteers, without whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Mil gracias. Please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, and so on. And if you don't know how to do that, you can go to latinolit.com and we've got some examples there. Those reviews carry weight with publishers as well as with other readers. Buy books to support our authors. Let's see. And if your library doesn't have a book you want to read, we'll ask them to order it. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Remember, our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos. All are welcome. Our December books are The Volcano's Daughters by Gina Marie Barbieri. There is a Rio Grande in Heaven by Ruben Reyes Jr. And Jose Feeds the World, How a Famous Chef Feeds Millions of People in Need Around the World by Dave Unger. Again, thank you all for your continued support of our book club and Latino literature. And please join us in celebrating Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club throughout the year by buying books and supporting Latino authors. And I want to say, Comadre Maria Ferrer, you were missed today. I hope you enjoyed your concert.
Can I have a question? Just one question to Karla.
Okay.
Karla, what influenced Salvadorian cuisine? What kind of influence? Spanish? What?
Hi, Mirta.
Hey,
Thank you so much for your question. So that's an excellent question. And one of the things I've learned from talking to so many anthropologists and cooks from El Salvador is that Salvadoran cuisine is a fusion cuisine. There are Spanish influences, of course, but there's also Arabic and there's also African. There are spices that tie us back to the Silk Road. And of course, you know, so many different ingredients that are indigenous to the land. So I think fusion can sometimes be seen as this exciting thing. And my experience hearing people talk about fusion can also be something that's forced, right? It's forced to exist together. And of course, there's a history behind that. And so it just makes it exciting for me to hear all the different ingredients that are used, because just as we have stories, those ingredients have stories of how they made it to these dishes. But yes, certainly Spanish cuisine, among a few others.
I'll try. Thank you. I
Thank
would
you.
like to ask more questions, but we have no time. So
That's correct.
it's really
Unfortunately,
nice.
we are out of time, but that was a great question. And thank you so much, Mista.
Yeah.
So good night. And always remember to read Latino Lit.
Good night. Happy holidays.
Good night, everyone.